There's a tragedy unfolding right now, a conflict so vast and so brutal that the evidence of it is literally visible from space. We're talking about Sudan, where a vicious civil war has escalated into what many are now calling a full-blown genocide. And the thing is, it's all happening while the world seems to be looking the other way.
Just think about that sentence for a second. It comes from reports on the ground, and it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around. And no, it's not a metaphor. The scale of the killing in parts of Sudan has been so immense that the ground itself is stained red, and those stains are big enough to be seen by satellites orbiting high above the Earth. That tells you just about everything you need to know about the horrifying intensity of this war.
So what was the event that really brought this hidden war into the light? It was the fall of El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur. For months, it was this besieged safe haven for hundreds of thousands of people who'd already fled their homes. But what happened when it was finally overrun by paramilitary forces? Well, it can only be described as a massacre.
And look, this isn't just an allegation. We're talking about documented evidence from Yale's Humanitarian Research Lab. Satellite images showed these clusters of objects the size of human bodies, that just weren't there the day before. You see widespread reddish discoloration of the ground. And maybe the most damning part? The images also show that paramilitary forces had built an earthen wall, a berm, around parts of the city. They literally created a kill box to trap civilians inside with no way out.
As horrifying as those satellite images are, the stories from survivors are somehow even worse. People who managed to get out describe fighters from the Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, going house to house, just systematically executing entire families. They say the fighters were hunting people down in the streets as they tried to flee.
The breakdown of any and all rules of war was just absolute. The RSF stormed the city's last working hospital and reportedly killed over 460 people inside. Patients, doctors, nurses. A hospital is supposed to be a sanctuary, you know? It's protected under international law. In El Fasher, it became a slaughterhouse.
So, who is responsible for this unimaginable violence? Well, this whole conflict is basically a power struggle between two generals who, ironically enough, used to be allies. Let's break down the two main forces that are tearing Sudan apart. Okay, so on one side, you have the Sudanese Armed Forces, or SAF. This is the country's official military, and it's led by General al-Burhan. On the other side, you've got the powerful paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, led by General Dagalo, who pretty much everyone calls Hemdi. Now get this, these two guys once worked together to overthrow Sudan's longtime dictator, and then they did it again to oust a civilian government. But their partnership completely shattered when it came down to who would actually get to rule the country. The entire war really boils down to one fundamental disagreement. As part of a plan to move towards a civilian-led government, the powerful RSF was supposed to merge into the official army, the SAF. Burhan, the army chief, he wanted it done in 2 years, which would have basically neutralized Hemekti's power. But Hemekti, he demanded 10 years, which would let him keep his own independent command structure. Neither guy would budge, and that power struggle right there plunged the entire nation into war.
But to really, truly understand the RSF's brutality, especially this pattern of ethnic cleansing we're seeing, you have to look at how they were created. Their entire origin story is rooted in a previous genocide.
You see, for decades, Sudan was ruled by the dictator Omar al-Bashir. His main obsession was just staying in power, so he used this strategy called coup-proofing. He deliberately created and empowered multiple rival security forces to keep them all fighting amongst themselves. That way, no single group could ever get strong enough to overthrow him. So, when a rebellion by non-Arab African groups broke out in the Darfur region, Bashir armed a local Arab militia to go crush it for him. They became known as the Janjaweed.
This timeline just lays it all out. It shows you the direct line from one genocide to the next. The Janjaweed, who were infamous as death on horseback back in the 2000s, were formalized into the RSF in 2013 by the very dictator they would later overthrow. Then, after a brief tense alliance with the army, they turned on each other in 2023. The point is, the DNA of the RSF was forged in genocide, and that same brutality is exactly what we're seeing play out today.
Okay, so a war this destructive, one that's gone on this long, it needs a constant flow of cash and weapons. In Sudan, the primary fuel for this fire isn't oil or anything like that. It's gold. Now get this, a staggering 80% of Sudan's gold is produced through what's called artisanal mining. This means it's not giant corporations with heavy machinery. It's small-scale miners, often just using basic tools, digging it out of the ground by hand.
And that makes the whole industry incredibly hard to regulate and incredibly easy for armed groups like the RSF to control, especially in their home turf of Darfur.
And this creates this just vicious cycle that funds the entire war. The RSF controls the mines. They force local miners to sell the gold to them at rock-bottom prices. This conflict gold is then smuggled out of the country, mostly to the United Arab Emirates. Once it gets refined in Dubai, its bloody origins are completely washed clean. The profits are then used to buy the very drones, weapons, and supplies that allow the RSF to continue its campaign of terror. It's a resource that should be building Sudan, but instead it's being used to systematically destroy it.
But the situation is even more tangled than that. According to experts like Suleiman Baldo, it's not just the RSF. Gold from territory controlled by their enemy, the SAF, also finds its way to the massive Dubai gold market. So what does that mean? It means the same external actor, the UAE, is a major trading partner for both sides of this brutal conflict. It just highlights how incredibly complex these international entanglements really are.
So, let's recap. We have satellite evidence of massacres. We have eyewitness accounts of ethnic cleansing. We have a clear money trail funding the violence. Surely, the world is stepping in to stop this, right?
Just let this number sink in for a moment. Over 12 million people. That is more than the entire population of countries like Sweden or Greece. The UN has officially labeled this the single largest humanitarian crisis on the planet. Millions are displaced inside Sudan, millions more are refugees, and they're all facing the constant threat of starvation and violence.
And yet, despite that staggering human toll, the crisis in Sudan has gotten just a tiny fraction of the global media coverage and political attention compared to other major conflicts. While the wars in Ukraine and Gaza have, for obvious reasons, dominated headlines and policy debates, the slaughter in Sudan has largely been happening in the shadows. You know, the tragic irony here is that we've been here before. When the Janjaweed were committing genocide in Darfur back in the 2000s, it sparked a global Save Darfur movement. There were massive protests, celebrity activism, real international pressure. Today, as the direct descendants of the Janjaweed attempt to finish the job, that global outcry is just gone. There's a deafening silence.
And this all brings us to the final, haunting question. We have clear evidence of a genocide. We know how it's being bankrolled by a global trade in conflict gold. We know millions of lives have been completely destroyed. So why the silence? Why has the world, which once rallied to save Darfur, now chosen to look away as the nightmare repeats itself? That is the question this crisis forces all of us to confront.